The Egyptian funerary symbolism. When it comes to the ancient Egyptians, the importance of religion and the journey of life and life after death is prominent in their art, day-to-day lives, and overall sense of identity and culture. The Egyptians were told to live morally while strictly adhering to the Egyptian religion. Depending on how they lived their lives and their beliefs in the underworld, eternal life, and rebirth of the soul, it determined whether their soul continued to live in the afterlife. For the Egyptians, death was not considered final or an end. It was merely the beginning of the next phase or a transition of the individual's eternal journey. Because of the significance of various gods and goddesses in the religion, the Egyptians believed that funerary art and symbols would help the deceased on their journey towards eternal life by bringing protection, guidance, and overall transformation from a living world to a blissful spiritual one. Egyptians believed that the individual had multiple parts of their soul instead of just one overall soul. There are a total of 9 parts of the soul: Kat, Ka, Ba, Shuyet, Ak, Sahu, Sek, Ib, and Ren. Each part of the soul needed to be accounted for at the time of death of the individual. Kat was the name of the physical body, which when it became a corpse, provided the link between one's soul and one's earthly life. For this aspect of the soul, it was believed that the body still needed nourishment similarly to when the individual was alive. So food and drink offerings were brought to the tomb and laid on an offerings table. Additionally, tomb paintings or carvings had images of the deceased sitting at an offerings table filled with food. Ka was considered one's astral self and was created the moment the individual was born. It determined the individual's personality, and it was believed that all living forms, including plants, animals, and even up to gods, had Ka. The Ka would absorb the power from the food offerings left in the tomb and would help sustain the individual in the afterlife. The Ba was considered the soul of the individual and took the form of a human-headed bird that could travel between the afterlife and one's corpse. The Ba could also visit with the gods or return to the places the individual had loved in life. Both Ka and Ba go hand in hand in order to receive sustenance in the afterlife. Ba's job was to make sure that the corpse itself reunited with Ka to receive sustenance. Just like how the Apis bull on the left was the Ba for the god Osiris, and the phoenix was the Ba for the sun god Ra on the right. Next, we have the Shuyet, which was essentially the shadow of the soul and represented comfort and protection. It operated as a guided entity that protected the individual in the afterlife. Next, we have Ak, which was the immortal, transformed self or the enlightened spirit, and was considered the higher form of the soul. The enlightened spirit could enjoy eternity amongst the gods or return to earth through the aspect of Sahu. Sahu is an aspect of Ak that allows the soul to appear as a ghost or in dreams of loved ones. Sekhum is another aspect of Ak that manifests itself as the power to control one's surroundings and outcomes. Next is the spiritual heart called Ib, which was the source of good and evil and defined an individual's character. It was the Ib that was the entirety of the individual's personality, thoughts, and their deeds during their time on earth. For this reason, the physical heart was always kept in the mummified corpse with a protective charm laid on top to prevent a false condemning of the soul when the Ib gets weighed in the balances against the white feather of truth by Osiris. Lastly, we have Ren, the secret name given by the gods to the individual after they are born. The name is only known to the gods, and it is the name they call the individual in the afterlife. Because there are multiple aspects of the soul that needed to be addressed, the significance of funerary and mortuary rituals were extremely important. One of these rituals was the mummification process itself, which was a practice to preserve the body. During the process, protection amulets and spiritual texts were included to address all aspects of the soul. The mummification process starts with the removal of organs that would decay first. Embalmers would remove all organs and place them in special boxes or canopic jars, leaving only the heart, as it was believed it carried the spirit of the deceased and was needed for them to travel in the underworld. The correct rituals and prayers were performed by priests during various stages of the process. After the removal of the organs, the body was covered with salt called natron and was used to completely remove all the moisture out of the body. This process was performed so that the corpse still looked as lifelike as it did when the individual was alive. Once this was done, the wrapping of the body began. Hundreds of yards of linens were used to carefully wrap each finger, toe, arm, and leg to protect the conservation of the body. Amulets such as the scarab beetle and the knot of Osiris were placed among the wrappings, and prayers and magical words were sometimes written on some of the linen strips. Warm resin was used to coat the body during several stages of the process. Once the dead were buried, the living would continue to perform rituals and bring food and beverages so that the soul received sustenance even after death. The mummification of the body was important because the body was the home for the soul or spirit. If the body was destroyed, it could mean that the soul was also lost or destroyed as well. All of this preparation was set to aid the individual's journey through the duat or the underworld. Before the spirit was deemed pure and worthy to live eternally in the field of reeds, the spirit had to travel through rivers of Osiris and through his hall of truth. The journey was not easy as there were many challenges and the spirit had to pass through fiercely guarded gates and navigate through perilous lakes of fire. Once the deceased made it to the hall of truth, the heart is weighed on a gold scale against a single white feather of the goddess of truth and balance Mat. If the heart weighed lighter than the feather, it was deemed pure and the spirit was then sent to live in the peaceful field of reeds. However, if the heart weighed heavier, weighed down by sin, it was cast to the devourer of the unworthy, Amet, who would then consume the soul and erase them from existence, a final death. In order to aid the individual for the journey through the duat, the dead were provided with spells, maps, and passwords to overcome the obstacles. Sacred texts, like those in the Book of the Dead, were essential in this process. The Book of the Dead was not a book per se, but a rather collection of writings, prayers, incantations, and spells written on papyrus scrolls, or even on the tomb walls. One of the most popular and well-known spells was the spell of 125, or the weighing of the heart ritual. The spell describes the trial of the weighing of the heart against the white feather of Mat. Symbols like Ankh, which was the symbol of eternal life, and the Djed pillar was associated with Osiris, and they were present in the tomb as hieroglyphics or in tomb paintings. Another symbol used in funerary customs was the scarab beetle. The scarab beetle was often associated with the god Khepri, who was believed to represent creation and the rising sun. Scarab beetles, like the one pictured on the left, were often engraved in the tombs of the deceased or used as amulets that were placed on the heart to symbolize protection and good fortune. Another symbol seen throughout the tomb is the Eye of Horus. The Eye of Horus is used to symbolize prosperity, protection, and lastly, we have the other amulet called the Knot of Isis that is pictured on the right, or Tiet, which was used to symbolize the goddess Isis and protection in the afterlife. The coffins and sarcophagi themselves also had important symbols and paintings to further help the deceased. If not, all coffins had painted eyes or wadjet eyes, so that the deceased could see, so to speak, in their journey to the afterlife. The appearance of wings on the coffins were painted to associate with the winged goddesses Isis and Nephthys, who would help assist Osiris, and the addition of a headdress collar and the cross-arm pose reflected an image of Osiris. This was to symbolize resurrection and rebirth, which is also associated with the god Osiris. Some of the examples where we can see a lot of this hieroglyphics and tomb paintings is in the tombs themselves. This one is the tomb of Nefertari, and as you can see on the walls, she has a lot of symbols that we have mentioned earlier. Towards the bottom of this picture, she has the Book of the Dead that was inscribed in symbols, and towards the middle of the painting, you can see her as her bird-headed spirit, or her ka. On the left, we see a lot more of the Book of the Dead and more symbols to represent protection and resurrection. And on the right, we see her on her offerings table, offering stuff to Osiris. Next, we have the tomb of King Tut. King Tut was one of the youngest pharaohs that ever lived. He did not live very long. He only lived to be like 18 years old. But as you can see, the symbols on the walls are still very prominent. On the picture on the right, you can see the the symbol of Ankh, which was used for protection. And in this one, you can see on the top left the scarab beetle, which is also used for protection as well. And although the Egyptians seemed to focus a lot of their energy and time on their death was really not considered a bad thing or an end. It was an opportunity for rebirth and the beginning of the next phase in life. However, a deeply rooted fear of spiritual danger was enough for the Egyptians to take extra precautions when it came to funerary rituals and customs. A focus on a beautiful transformation rather than just a final death is what helped the Egyptians live a life of morals and peace. They did not fear death because death in the physical world just meant you get to live immortality in the spiritual world. There they could live happily among the gods in the blissful field of reeds.